One of the biggest things that people regret, if that's what we're going to talk about, is not doing what they always wanted to do, putting it off, believing they have another year. You sitting right here, you probably believe you're going to be here next year. So do I, right? We live our life believing that we have next year. And at some point, you don't. When I first started getting premonitions of people's death, and I would journal it, from my team in spirit. I thought, oh, am I supposed to stop it? Am I supposed to, tell the person and we shift it and change it? I didn't know what that meant. And it weighed heavily on me. And I have family members like my grandmother, Grandmom Sylvia. She said, if you ever get anything on me, you need to tell me. Well, I did get something on her. And I said,
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Shifting Dimensions podcast. I'm your host, Jummie Moses, and thank you guys so much for tuning in. On the show today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Helen Gretchen Jones. Gretchen is a certified death doula, intuitive, and channeler. She just released a new book, Healing Whispers from Spirit Guides, Bridging the Gap Between Life and the Afterlife with a Death Doula's Wisdom. Her goal is to offer not just information, but profound understanding and practical tools that can help people find solace, meaning, and even beauty in the face of loss. Gretchen, welcome to Shifting Dimensions. It's such a pleasure to have you here today.
thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, one thing I love talking about on the show is the afterlife because I feel like that's us kind of leaving the body and connecting with our spirit self and entering a different dimension, and also kind of talking about what it means to be a human being, having a spiritual experience, right? And I think a lot of your work definitely touches on all of these things. So I'm excited to speak with you. And I want to start off by asking you, when did you discover the concept of end of life care and what made you decide to become a death doula?
So I would I believe that I first started serving the dying community after my father's death in 2015. I didn't become certified as a death doula until 2018 when I learned that was even a thing. Um, but I had already been working with the dying community for a few years before I became a death doula. And it was my dad's death, which was relatively unexpected by the majority of the family, that led me to kind of want to focus. I'd already had a connection with spirit, but kind of want to focus on how people can have a better death or a good death, as opposed to, our family didn't want to talk about it. Our family struggled with, we had a little bit of denial around his situation. And so I thought, wow, it would have been so healing if I had the tools back then to kind of aid the family through the process of his death. Yeah,
Thank,
that's how I got started.
yeah, thank you for sharing that. So you said that you had a connection with spirit, and I want to talk about that. But for those who are listening, I don't want to assume that they know what a death doula is. So could you explain what a death doula is and what they do?
Sure. So, a death doula is a person who helps people transition. So, we all know that the birth doula helps bring life into the world. A death doula helps someone exit the world, help them transition holistically. This used to be done a lot by nurses. And then, when we had our big kind of changing, a lot of changes in our healthcare system, the nurses were required to fill out more paperwork and they have a lot more red tape surrounding their daily rounds, and so they don't have the time that they used to really sit bedside with patients anymore, which I find actually was one of their favorite aspects of their job. And so now there's sort of a need for people to be available to those who are dying, to be able to sit where nurses aren't able to do that as much anymore. So that's what a death doula is.
Yeah, and every time I hear someone talk about what it means to be a death doula, right? Because you said that nurses typically handled this before in the past. And when I think about that, I just kind of think about the fact that they probably most often, and I could be wrong, handle the administrative stuff that comes with end of life care, right? Whether that's insurance and making sure things are, properly assigned to someone else to take care of when their patient passes away. But when I talk to death doulas, it seems like there's that component to it, like the paperwork and all of that stuff, but also the spiritual
Mhm.
component of dying. So can you kind of talk about that piece of it? Like what is the, in addition to the more administrative stuff, like what are the components of end of life care on a practical level and also on a spiritual level?
So, on a practical level, yes, we can help assist with not so much insurance. That would be definitely a hospital or doctor nurse situation. Insurance does not cover death doula work at this time. If it did, then we'd be filling out a bunch of paperwork and going through the red tape, and we'd be in the same situation as nurses. So, hopefully, it stays away from that for now, for a little while. But on the spiritual side, a death doula is someone who's present, someone who is sitting with family, sitting with patients, someone who is we can help you fill out do not resuscitates and those types of orders, but that's about it on the paperwork side. But it is really more about being present so people don't feel alone. Being versed in the dying process, what happens, the stages of death, and what that looks like, so that as those stages start to happen, we can bring a greater understanding to those who are observing or witnessing it or even going through it. So it's just being familiar with the dying process, being present, being non-judgmental, being compassionate, and just really being available so people don't feel that they're alone in this process.
So now I want to talk about your comment about having a connection with spirit prior to becoming a death doula. So can you talk about that a little bit? What was your connection with spirit? Did you have gifts? Did you have visions? What was the extent of your connection to spirit and when did it start?
So my connection with spirit has been for as long as I can remember. I have always had spiritual experiences, even as a very little girl. However, as I started sort of acknowledging them and working with them and practicing, they have definitely developed and gotten stronger over the years. Once I started working with the dying community, it sort of shifted a little bit. My connection with, I have a team in spirit. I call them A team. They're my helpers, my guides. And once I started working with the dying community, A team, because I do regular meditations, really started pushing compassion. Compassion as they wanted me to put myself in someone else's shoes, not to see what I would do different, not to see what I would change or how I would have, reacted in their situation, but just simply to be in their shoes and try to feel what they're feeling. And it was that simple. So they've been pushing compassion for so long that as I started working with compassion and with people who are dying, another gift started to unfold. And this is what I'm kind of working with right now. And I love spirit, it changes, right? So our gifts unfold as we do. Right now, I'm sort of given a ballpark time when someone's going to transition. And having an idea of when someone's going to go, it could be literally years in advance, or it could be days in advance. And I journal these and I keep track of what I've gotten on people and when they're going to be transitioning. So I think as you start working with your gifts in a certain capacity and you're open to spirit coming through and guiding you with those gifts, I think different gifts will unfold based on where you're putting your energy, because where we focus is where we are. Right now I'm focused in the dying community. So,
Yeah, and you describe yourself as an intuitive and a channeler.
mhm.
And I want to know what the difference is between two of those things and what they are. My understanding of an intuitive, and I could be wrong, I think we're all intuitive to some extent, right? Some people are able to tap into their intuition a lot quicker than other people or recognize it a lot quicker, and it's stronger for certain people, but we all have that like hit or sense of knowing, right? That's what I call our intuition. And then channeling is like you're channeling another energy force. I could be simplifying it, but I just want to know, what's the difference between being an intuitive and a channeler, and do both of these gifts feed into each other?
Yes, and yes. I think, like you said, everyone is an intuitive to some degree. And I also think everyone channels to some degree. If you think about in your life a time where the words just came out effortlessly and you just kind of flowed in the moment and your words were really helpful and healing to someone, and you can't really quite recall everything that you said, that would be sort of a channeling moment where you were guided through inspiration intuitively to speak words that would be helpful and hopeful and healing for someone. So I think that we all channel. And I also think that we also are all intuitive. And like you said, everyone can do it to some capacity. There's this well-known medium, and I took one of her classes one time, and she described being able to connect to spirit, which would be intuition or channeling, connecting to your higher self, that whole bubble of information, as being able to play the piano. Some people sit down and they play Beethoven. Some people sit down and they play chopsticks. Some people work for years to be able to play chopsticks. And some people, and some people, you can't, maybe they don't even have hands, but they sit down and you can still play with other parts of your body. Everyone can connect to spirit in some form or fashion. It's just some people are going to be naturally more gifted at it. Some people have to work a little harder, but everyone can connect. So I think the difference between an intuitive and a channeler is I think the channeler is using words. Although some people would say, well, if I do a painting, I'm channeling creativity through that painting. So I guess you could also channel that way. There's not much of a difference, I suppose, but an intuitive is a knowing. It's this gut instinct. And a channel is, I think, relaying a message based around that gut instinct.
Okay. So an intuition is a knowing, and then channeling is relaying a message based on that gut instinct. And it could also be, I mean, I guess our intuition, it could come from our higher self. It might come
Hmm.
from our spirit guides, the Holy Spirit, however whatever jargon you subscribe to. But I think is the relaying of that, especially, I guess, if it's not just pertaining to you, that then it's channeling. Because I feel like you could probably channel something. I'm not saying you could, but I'm saying some people could probably channel something for me where it's
Hmm.
like you get a message, but it's not relating to you, but you feel inspired to share something that could potentially help me, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, all right. So I just wanted to ask that because I think that in the work that you do, like kind of going back to the piece about compassion, I think that's very interesting that you brought that up because obviously, one thing I'm passionate about learning more about and talking about is this idea of empathy, right? And for some
Mhm.
reason in my mind, when I think about empathy, it's almost synonymous to compassion. And I don't know if that's accurate, right? But again, going back to compassion and how it relates to your work, you said something about spirit kind of pushing you to understand how people feel rather than thinking for yourself, oh, you would have done something differently. Like you're literally stepping into their shoes. What's the significance of that? Like, why is there so much power in that? Why do you think why do you think spirit thinks that's important?
Spirit, my team in spirit, and see, that's my jargon. A team. The reason that they find it to be really, really important is just on a human, just being human on a human collective level. We are very judgmental, and we are born to be that way because we have to fit in. We have to survive. We have to take note of our family, what they like, what they don't like, our family cultures, and then we have to mold ourselves to fit in just to be able to survive. And then when we move into our teenage years and early adult years, we start trying to figure out who we are separate from our families. And because we've gotten ourselves so, in that vein of looking at someone, judging their actions, learning to reason, all that stuff, it all becomes from a very self-centered place just to survive. It's just part of being human. But once we start stepping into someone else's shoes, which is not easy, it's uncomfortable sometimes because we want to figure out what we would do to fix it or change it, or to make it better according to us, which is also self centered, uh, which is fine. Okay. But whenever you're starting to work with other people, then you have to step outside of what your personal thoughts and judgments are and what you would do. And you have to connect with that person right where they are, because right where they are is right where they're supposed to be. And it's perfect. So if you can relate to them in that way and connect to them on that way without trying to change them or fix them, then you are blending with them in a way that is so divine and so beautiful. And there is no judgment in that space. And so compassion is important just to connect with another human being judgment free. And it is hard to do that sometimes initially because we've been trained to be self centered since we're born. And so to step out of that, it takes a little bit of time and it takes practice.
You know, I would assume that part of what you do, and let me know if this is part of what you do, right? When people are getting prepared to transition, right? Obviously, they come to you and all of that stuff. Do you talk to them about past hurts, things that they're not able to release? Because when you're talking about compassion, right, especially in the work that you do, I'm assuming you probably have to exercise that almost every single time when you're interacting with, a client, right? So, what are some of the things that people struggle with the most when they realize that their life is, coming to an end? And how are you able to help them work through that? Is that through you being compassionate and meeting them where they are so that they can release whatever they're still holding on to?
Yes, that's part of it. So, an example might would be I had a patient who I call Mr. Robinson, and something he was holding on to, even in his 80s, was that he felt he had lived his life based on how he thought others wanted him to live his life, which would have been typical of the 1950s, quite frankly. So he was in line with where our society was at the time. But here, as he was starting with the process of his terminal diagnosis, he started thinking about all the things he really wanted to do, but didn't allow himself to do it because it didn't follow social norms or it didn't fit what he thought others wanted from him. And he regretted that. And he had also figured out in that time that he had taught that behavior to his children. He taught them, no, 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 your reputation's important, or, oh, no, 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 you can't do that. What would people think? And so right here at the end, I would start to kind of talk to him a little bit about it. I would say, so if that bothers you, maybe you need to talk to your kids a little bit, maybe bring them in. And he would brush me off. Usually, actually, he would fake fall asleep and that would end the conversation. That's what he did all the time. He would fake narcolepsy and he would be out. And that was like, we're not, we're not going to talk about it anymore. But I guess I wore him down a little bit because one day I walked in and he was asleep and his daughter was in there crying. And she said, I just had the most amazing conversation with my dad. He told me that I was a good mother. He told me not to worry about what other people think. He told me all these beautiful things. I have it in the book, but after she left, I was suspected that Mr. Robinson was not really asleep. I think he faked it to get out of the conversation with his daughter as well, because it was really hard for him to be vulnerable. And he told me that. He goes, there's no way I can ever tell my family that. They would think I'm weak. And I'm like, what have you got to lose? You're not going to be here much longer anyway. That's hard news to hear sometimes. But I think when he thought, well, I'm going to be dying anyway, I might as well just get it off my chest. And when he did that, she broke down in tears. She allowed herself to be vulnerable. And when people are vulnerable and they allow others to be vulnerable too, everyone opens up and there's like this weight that's released. And really, if you're the patient who's dying, what do you have to lose? There's nothing.
I love that. So, I don't know if you've written down, I don't know if you've written this down, but I'm curious to know in your work, right, over the years as a debt doula, what is one of the most common realizations that people arrive at before they transition about life?
I do journal all of this stuff, actually. So every time I meet with a patient, I go home and journal my experience. So one of the biggest things that people regret, if that's what we're going to talk about, is not doing what they always wanted to do, putting it off, believing they have another year. You sitting right here, you probably believe you're going to be here next year. So do I, right? We live our life believing that we have next year. And at some point, you don't. And if you keep putting off everything you've ever wanted to do or something that's important to you that's going to make a difference to you or your loved ones or even this world in some small way, do it. What have you got to lose? That is what I learn over and over from the bedside of my patients. Another thing that I learned from working with dying patients is they are so terrified often of being a burden. And if families could know in advance that they can help them release that fear of being a burden, and to not call it, burdensome, but to call it accepting of love, accepting of care. And I have journaled this, and I haven't quite, I haven't drawn a conclusion from it yet, but it has been my experience so far of my patients that people who have long terminal illnesses, not my short term ones, but my long term illnesses, are people who never allowed themselves to be loved. They may have been super generous with their love or kind of a curmudgeon, but either way, they didn't allow themselves to receive it. And I don't know yet. I'm just journaling it. It's just an ongoing experiment, but sort of a terminal illness forces you to stop and forces you to receive love and care, and you have to surrender to it. You can't stop it. So I wonder sometimes if the soul needs to feel that love, if a terminal illness is in the soul's highest and greatest good, so that they can learn to receive. I don't know yet. Don't quote me on that, but that's just what my journals are revealing at this time.
Incredible. There's a book that I read recently. It's called The Myth of Normal by Dr. Gabor Mate. And really, the book talks about how a lot of illnesses are linked to our emotional state. And we don't really pay attention to that as often as we need to. A lot of terminal illnesses come from, he had several examples in the book where a lot of people struggled with saying no, right? They would always say yes
Mhm.
to everything. They'd work themselves, you know, almost to death, and they would be giving, 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 giving. And on the outside, it looked like they had this beautiful life, but they never said no. They never stood up for themselves. They tended to bypass a lot of their emotional struggles. And then eventually that would manifest as some sort of autoimmune disorder. And they're just like, what's happening? Right. So it's very interesting that you're saying what you're saying. We're not going to quote you, but I would not be surprised if that in fact was the case. So thank you for sharing that common realization. Outside of that, are a lot of people scared to transition outside of feeling like they're a burden to their family? Are they afraid of what's awaiting them on the other side? Or are they kind of apprehensive of the unknown that they're about to venture into? Or are they feeling more at rest and calm and accepting of transitioning?
Okay, so both. So in the months and weeks leading up to their death, their physical death, they are oftentimes, not every time, but oftentimes they are scared and nervous about the unknown. What does that look like? Is it going to hurt? Am I going to be uncomfortable? Is this it? Is this really a final goodbye? All of these, fears. Yes. However, when a person starts the actively dying process and we start moving into the days before they take their final breath, they start to, in my experience so far, have experiences with spirit beings, deceased loved ones, angels, light, beings of light. I mean, all sorts of experiences like that, spiritual experiences. And all of a sudden, their fear lifts. They start being in two worlds at once. They're being comforted by this other world and these otherworldly experiences, and they're not as afraid anymore. And they get quiet. They turn inward because they are focusing elsewhere than in their physical body. And so initially, yes, there is a fear. I imagine that every person who hears the news of a terminal illness has initially a fear. They're not ready to go, perhaps. But right before, there seems to be this peace that comes over them and that everything is okay as they start to have these spiritual experiences. Um, I would also like to share that it has been my experience so far when I'm sitting with my patients that when they take their final breath, they're actually standing outside their body. And I know that sounds out there a little bit, but the body, like a vehicle, the soul gets into it or the soul uses it, blends with it. And some people take it fast, some people take it slow, some people take it in for regular maintenance, some people run it into the ground. It doesn't matter. When the vehicle starts to putter out, we don't have to just sit in the vehicle. We can step out of it and watch it coast to a stop. So while the body is shutting down and returning to the earth and what appears to be suffering by people who are observing and witnessing it, watching their loved one take their final breath, they're already standing with us, observing their body. And that has, I recently told that story to someone else and they said, oh, well, that's supported by near death experiencers who in the hospital pop out of their body so they don't have to experience the trauma of CPR and chest compressions and all these things. And then they go back into their body whenever the body's no longer in its traumatic state. So I, I don't know. I think that there's something to that. I think that death is probably easy. I don't think it's very painful in the moment. And I don't think that unless our soul really wants to experience that final breath, there's no need. And the soul pops out and is feeling. I tell you what, the feeling I feel when they're stepping out of their bodies is huge. I feel expansive. I feel bigger than the room. I feel an unconditional love for that person, and I may not even know them very well. I just feel like no matter what they did in their life, I loved them for all of it. And it's the most beautiful experience. So, yes, with the with the dying process, there is some fear beforehand, but ultimately it ends up okay.
It's interesting that you brought up how you feel in the moment when you are with a client or a patient who's transitioning, because I was going to ask you about that. I was going to ask you, what are the energetics of the room? What does it feel like? Can you still sense the person? Like, is essentially, is there an energy shift when that person takes their last breath? And I guess you did answer. I don't know if you want to expand on that even more, but I'm just curious to know more if you have more to share on that.
For me, I become very much aware of my patient leaving the body, returning to the body, leaving the body hours before they actually take their final breath. But when it's your loved one and you're there, you are already started the grieving process. You're heartbroken that this person is leaving physically and you're going to miss their hugs and their kisses and their phone calls. And so it is much harder for someone to, unless they've been practicing, I think, to tune into their loved one who's outside the body when they're so all just wrapped up in their own grief of the loss of that loved one. As a third party person coming in, it's much easier for me to witness this because I don't have that heart connection to them the way their loved ones do. But once they step out, I feel so much love. It is, it's the most beautiful experience. So yes, yes.
And, it's interesting that you said that you've been getting dates from spirit, telling you when someone's going to transition. How does that make you feel? Do you share that with the clients? And, or does it like, are you just like, oh, okay, cool. Now I can kind of get my affairs in order and make sure that things are aligned for that date?
Okay. This is interesting because it's a work in progress with me. When I first started getting premonitions of people's death, and I would journal it from my team in spirit, I thought, oh, am I supposed to stop it? Am I supposed to, tell the person and we shift it and change it? I didn't know what that meant, and it weighed heavily on me. And I have family members like my grandmother, Grandmom Sylvia. She said, if you ever get anything on me, you need to tell me. Well, I did get something on her. And I said, you have 2.5 years. And she was like shocked because let me tell you, she was, in her 80s, ballroom dancing, doing competitions. She in no way had 2.5 years. Like she thought she had at least in their decade. So that was a shock to her. And she did die with, around her 2.5 year mark. And um, I then questioned, did by me telling her, did I manifest it? Did she then focus on it and create it? So then I struggled with that a little bit. But what my team in spirit has led me to believe at this point is that I don't get some kind of, grand information about when someone's going to die. When a soul has made the choice to die, a soul on a soul level, not necessarily the personality, but when the soul has made the choice, then I'm able to read that wave or packet of information that's coming in. So it isn't that I'm like, oh, I'm getting some kind of information that this person is, now I know it's based on their choices so far because every soul chooses how and when they're going to die to some degree, a large degree, actually. And I'm only picking up on what has already been chosen. So I have a few family members right now that I have journaled their deaths, but they've already told me, don't tell me if I know anything. And so I'm zipped, but I have it in my journals.
That, I mean, I don't want to project, but that must be hard. It's one thing to get dates for clients. I guess it's another thing to get potential timelines for family members, right? Um, I mean, again, I don't want to project, but that I would be like, oof, I don't want to know that, especially when it's someone that I'm super close to. And I do like what you said about the information not being this like, oh, out of the blue, like grand information, but information that on a soul level, the person already knows. Because people say that we choose when and how we're going to pass, which I guess for a lot of people, that's even hard for them to wrap their head around. But I've heard quite a few people say that, oh, the soul knows when they're going to leave. They already chose that, right? Obviously, when you're in the physical body, you don't remember that, but it's kind of like you're picking up on the timeline the soul has already chosen for themselves. But again, um, I want to
On
know
this
like
on this timeline. Yes.
on this timeline, right? Because
Yes.
there are different
Yeah.
timelines, and we can get into the multiverse and parallel universes and all of that stuff, and people can hop timelines and switch
Yes.
outcomes. So the future is a moving target. So yes, I
Yes.
I understand what you're saying, but when you get those dates for family members, are these family members older, right? Are they younger family members, or like how do you process it when it's when these people are so directly connected to you, or can you just pick up anyone's sort of deadline? Yeah. No pun
Deadline.
intended.
That's funny. So I have picked up on the death of family members as young as 30, as old as 80s. So and in between. Some have happened, some have not. Many have already happened, but some have not. And it is actually hard. When I first get that wave of information, it like the last one I had was 2 months ago. I got the information that's 4 years out. I was cooking spaghetti and it was just a wave of information, just hit me like a just whoosh, washed over me. So it wasn't like I was in a meditation asking. But now I know, and I will take steps with my loved one because I already know they don't want to know. So I will take steps with my loved one to make sure that they're doing everything they've ever wanted to do, that if they have any regrets, that I encourage them to be vulnerable and speak what they need to speak in a kind, loving way, for them to recognize where they are, where they want to go over the next handful of years. And yeah, so I am privately working with that. I have told one person, my husband, and I don't, he's not a very spiritual person. So I think in the back of his mind, he's just like, well, maybe not. But it's just, we all can hope that, right? But at the same time, death is not a terrible thing. It's not, tell that to someone who's losing a loved one, I know, but um, it's not the final goodbye. It's a see you later sort of thing. And so my team and spirit, and maybe because I'm working with the dying community, really try to drive home for me that this is not the worst thing ever. Death is not dying is easy. So, yeah.
That makes me want to ask you this question that came to my mind. And it's, with all the clients that you've had, right, has there been any moment where you yourself kind of really struggled with the loss of the person, where it was heavier than usual? And, if you want to share that, and why was it so heavy for you if you've experienced that?
So probably my most beloved patient would be Mr. Arjuna. Obviously, I'm changing their names up, but to respect their family's privacy. But Mr. A was on hospice for 5 years, and I worked with him for four of them. And so I grew to love him so much. I was seeing him a few times a week for 4 years. He was very, very frail. And he also was very spiritual and had moments of psychic awareness and things like that. So that was always exciting too, because not a lot of people want to share those kind of experiences. So he was just so much fun. And we would debate and also on religions. He was raised Hindu, then became sort of agnostic throughout the majority of his life. And then right there at the end, in the last year, he chose to return back to Hinduism. And so we recognized and honored his faith. Actually, that's an interesting story too, because he started seeing his deceased wife the last year of his life. And that was very distressing for him because he had gone back to accepting Hinduism as his faith. And his wife had transitioned 30 years before he did. And in the Hinduism religious belief system, she should have already reincarnated. Time is linear. She should have already reincarnated and already been living her new life. The time had already passed for her. And so it was very distressing. Why is she here with me? This goes against what we believe. And so we had to work through that with him while continuing to support and respect his religious beliefs. So there are challenges like that sometimes come up, but losing him was hard for me. And actually, if you don't mind, I'd like to share something too. I was worried he was going to take his last breath while I was away. And I was at that time still under the misconception that I needed to be there for the last breath. That's no longer an issue. You can hold vigil from anywhere in the world. But at the time, I thought it was important. And my team in spirit came through and they said, you don't have to be there for his last breath. But what you can do is you can send him a love letter. And I'm a very visual person. And so my love letter was a waterfall, this lush greenery, these bright blue skies, this perfect landscape that I knew Mr. A would love. And I just envisioned it in my head. And I took all that love I felt for him and all my hopes for him to have a peaceful transition. And I just kind of infused it in with that image and thought in my mind. And then I just said, okay, I'm leaving that love letter energetically for him to receive whenever he transitions. And my team in spirit said, leaving that amount of love and that love letter for him, even though it's a mental love letter, um, sort of lifts him up. And I don't know how. I still don't have an answer from A team on what that means, how it lifts them up in the spirit world in some manner. But so now I send love letters to all my patients. I send love letters to all my family, to a guy who looks like he's struggling to get up the hill on that bike. I don't know. I leave love letters. I have a long wake of love letters behind me. But I encourage anyone to leave love letters for anyone.
You mentioned that he was getting visitations from his wife. Why was she appearing to him? Did you get any insight on that? Because I know it was
Yes.
distressing for him at first. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. So he liked seeing her. It gave him hope that that his belief was real, that there's an afterlife, that there's something more than this physical life. So in that way, it was reassuring. Once we worked through, we tried all sorts of things. I think what we initially settled on was that perhaps she was a vision, the way humans throughout Hindu history have received visions from the god or God, and or one god manifesting as many deities. But so maybe she was a vision, and if she is a vision, then that means that gods and deities are real, and that means there is an afterlife, and that was reassuring for him in that way. So we approached it from that perspective. I also had a Catholic nun transition, Sister Bernadette, and she was distressed. I had come in, and she told me she wanted to make a confession, but not to a priest. And she told me that she had a sister from her convent visiting her, Sister Mary Catherine. And I was like, oh, that's nice, making small talk. And she goes, you don't understand. She's already deceased. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, that gets me excited. I love spiritual bedside experiences. And she goes, no, 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 you don't understand. I'm Catholic, like devout Catholic. She's a nun. I can't commune with the dead. And I said, well, you commune with the dead all the time. You talk to Jesus, you talk to God, you talk to Mother Mary. And she goes, no, no, no. I pray to them. I don't commune with them. I'm not having a conversation with them. I, can be thankful to them or ask them for something, but I'm not conversing. So I was like, oh, okay. Well, I was trying to figure out a way to handle that. I said, I think what we ultimately came upon was the idea that Mother Mary was visited by Archangel Gabriel, and who told her she was going to be having Jesus, right? So I went with that route and I said, maybe you're having a vision of Mary Catherine, Sister Mary Catherine. And she was just like, okay, let me think about this. I think she said, bless you, child. I'll think about that. But it was like trying to navigate someone's religious beliefs when it is contradicted by spirits showing up at bedside is so much fun, but it is challenging at times to kind of try to figure out how it fits into what they're willing to accept so that it becomes a joy and less of a distressing moment.
Well, I just love what you just said, those two examples actually, because I think it speaks to what you're talking about, that compassion piece, right? Because automatically, as you're telling these stories, I'm thinking, well, this is a perfect time to tell her that, that's perfectly normal, right? And even though as a Catholic, it's wrong to commune with the dead, or it's evil or could be portrayed as evil, well, actually, it's not evil, and kind of give her a quick lesson. But then hearing your approach, I'm like, well, you know what? That's much better. Because that's probably a way better approach than the one I would have that I would than the one I would have taken if I was in that situation, right? So I really love that you're like, okay, like you're trying to make them as calm as possible and still kind of give them an analogy that will, help put them at peace, right? Especially at this time, right? To keep them in that calm, loving frequency so that they can receive those visitations from spirits, right? And feel the love that's coming from those spirits, I assume,
Yes.
rather than judge the situation or be afraid, right? Because who knows what they're going to experience on the other side, but at least maybe the first couple of seconds after they transition, they don't, have like a scary experience based on any sort of fears that they're holding on to. So I actually love that approach because I was like, oh, I
Well,
would have
I'm
been
not.
like,
Well,
sorry, go
I
ahead.
wouldn't be planning on converting a nun in her last final hours on earth. So,
Yeah,
but
maybe don't do that. Yeah.
yeah, meet her where she's at. And then, who knows? What if I'm wrong? But it's just, that would be me pushing what I believe or what my experiences are. And she did tell me, because we met many times, but that she was aware of the sort of contradictions or hypocrisies in her faith, but she really valued the structure and she thought the good outweighed the bad of her religion. So she found she was not, she's not an idiot. She understands that there are things in the Bible necessarily that didn't fully resonate with her, but she accepted the whole truth for her, and that was her truth. So, yeah, I met her where she's at, and we try to take it from there to bring the greatest amount of peace.
Yeah, and I love that because Um, when I think about religion and people have different belief systems and people have different things that work for them. And I've refrained from putting things in this is good, this is bad, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense because, depending on where people are or what they resonate with, that's
Yeah.
what works for them, right? So I don't know if you're subscribed to a particular religion, but I don't know if you've given thought to religion and religious beliefs and practices based on the work that you do and the people you come across who have pretty strong religious beliefs that play into how they view what is happening with them.
So I have a master's degree in world religions, and I actually think that that has played a pretty big role in my understanding of working with people through their religious beliefs at end of life. Um, I try not to, or with the help of A team, because they remind me, because I am still human. They remind me to not try to put everything in a box, to not try to, when I try to say, oh, this must be this type of religion, this is true for me. I always like to say, this is my experience so far, because that can change tomorrow whenever I go and work with someone else and I have another experience. So it's really just my own experiences. And I hope that that keeps me open minded and aware that this amazing world that we get to co create is limitless. And I don't want to box it into a religion. I can just say my experiences so far. And I have had experiences where I'm like, oh, this is it. I'm supposed to stop these people from dying. That's why I'm getting these premonitions. Nope, nope, that wasn't true. So my experience so far is, for example, that I'm supposed to I might have a ballpark so I can help aid in their peaceful transition, but not so much to stop it. That's not my place. So I'm learning just based on experiences. I'm
Of
still learning.
course.
I'll always be learning.
Of course, it's a lifelong journey. And speaking of religion, one of the biggest things that come out of religion that's a heavy topic for for a lot of people, especially as it pertains to the afterlife, right? Transitioning from the physical body is the notion of heaven and hell, right? So have you received any hits from the A team, or just, from you reflecting and your own intuition into what heaven is, right? Like, are people actually going to a heaven? Does a hell exist? I don't know if you've gotten any sort of messages or guidance on that from spirit.
Actually, that is a question. Both those questions are in my frequently asked questions at the back of the book. Is there a heaven? Is there a hell? So, yes, I have actually asked a team, used my own intuition, and used the information of people as they were transitioning based on their experiences. So, when I sit with people and even their loved ones come through, so I guess it'd be doing a little bit of mediumship work as well. I have never once, not one time so far, have I had a person come through and validate an existence of hell. In fact, it's the exact opposite. They validate that, for lack of a better word, a heaven. But I sort of think it's the same thing as across the veil or a space in between. Like it's just a different plane of existence where challenges are different than they are in the physical body. It doesn't mean that challenges don't exist, that you're going to live on a cloud eating all the candy you think you want to eat and ice cream and all of that and playing a little tiny harp. It isn't like that. It's another way of being authentically connected without being weighted by the physical body or being focused in a physical body. So I think that that is a heaven. I think there's still things that we learn and grow and challenge us over there in different ways. But I have never had a single soul come through and validate hell. Not yet.
Okay, you mentioned challenges, and my curiosity peaked because,
Mhm.
like many people, I just think, okay, well, here on earth is the challenge. And once you transition, no more challenges or very minimal challenges. Of course, if we want to subscribe to the fact that each of us, our soul is on a journey and we might choose different paths of learning, right? So, of course, part of learning comes with challenges. But in general, like when you think about the concept of heaven, there's always this sense of like, well, you're free from the body. There's just nothing but unconditional, eternal love that you can just kind of swim in and just like cover yourself in. So there are really no challenges unless you choose to reincarnate back into a physical plane of some sorts. But you just mentioned that there are challenges on the other side potentially that are different from what we could fathom. Has spirit given you any insight onto what some of those challenges could be?
Yes. Okay. So it is exactly how you described. You're this feeling of unconditional love. You're free from the what we would I probably consider suffering or physical pain in that way. So you're free from that focused reality. However, and you can go and have that heavenly moment for a little while, but at some point you're going to get a little bored and you're going to want to navigate another experience different from floating in unconditional love. And that's where the challenge is. So I'm told, and I don't know, um, obviously, but I'm told that at some point when we decide that we would like another physical experience, a team tells me that we're one life, because this is where reincarnation comes in. Um, People are always talking about past lives and future lives, and a team's like, no, you're one life having many experiences, right? So um, your past life is happening at the same time as your future life. Like you kind of like, I don't know, you're multi-dimensional or multifaceted and you kind of do it all at once. So when you decide you want to jump back in and have a new experience besides floating in your sea of unconditional love because you're bored, then you meet with other like-minded spirits or other soul members and you start the process of where do I want to go from here? Do I want to go back to Earth? Do I want to go to a different planet? Do I want to? Those are where the challenges emerge. Trying to make what you want to get out of an experience match with what someone else needs to get out of an experience, and working together to form and co-create a new experience, and then deciding to do it together and when's the best time. So those are fun challenges. You're not going to get the physical pain and suffering the way we do here, but it's still like a logistical thing to kind of figure out, like, where do I want to go from here? What do I want to learn? What do I want to experience? So that type of challenge.
Okay. I've heard the concept that you talked about kind of we're when we think about having different lives, it's like all of those lives are working at the same time. They're
Hmm.
like manifested at the same time, but it's such a difficult concept to think about, right? Because it's like I'm currently Jummie in this life in 2024 in Northern Virginia, but maybe I'm Susan in 1850 right now as well,
Hmm.
living in London. You know what I mean? Like it's just so hard to think about because it's like, because how I think about it, right, is the soul, the essence, like moves from one host to the next or from one journey to the next. But every time someone says that, I now think about the soul as like if the soul was the my hand, right? And you see how I have different fingers, but they're all
There
part
you
of my
go.
hand. So it's kind of like each finger is like hooked up into a different straw or cup or something, right? But there's one large soul, but essences or fractions of those souls are in different buckets. That's kind of how I
That's
think about
amazing.
it.
I love
Okay.
that.
Okay. That helps me kind of try to conceptualize it a little bit more. And I know that like these things are always going to be very hard to fully grasp, but I hope this also helps the listeners who are listening to this try to figure out like, okay, how could that potentially work, right? Um,
That's a
okay.
great analogy.
Okay, thank you. I feel good about that. Okay, so this is a heavy question for you, but do you think about your own death and what you would want it to look like, given the work that you do?
Absolutely, I have. And when I sit with a team, and I'm doing my meditations, meditation's a loaded word too. So if I'm just sitting to kind of channel or just tune into that higher wisdom that comes through me, I write it all down in the mornings. And they tell me that they've been telling me lately that I'm not long for this world. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? You know what I mean? Or they haven't given me a time frame, but is it because humans in general have a short life? See, that's where I want to go with it. Or is it that, I'm I'm not going to make it to 100, or I'm not going to make it to 80. I don't know. So I know that they have told me that several times. And I'm just like, okay, well, what can I do today that is something that what can I do free of regrets? What can I, try to do if there's a big goal that I want to do, like writing my book was a big goal. Then what can I do every day to take steps to complete that before it's too late? So even if you're not like, oh my gosh, my book is going to take 2 years. What if I don't have 2 years? Well, then you take steps every day just because it makes you feel good. You feel whole in it. And if you leave this world feeling whole and at peace, well, then that's a beautiful death.
Mm. Well, see, what I love about talking to you is first, I feel so peaceful, right? Because this is such a heavy topic. And even asking you that question, I didn't sense a shift in your energy of like, this is about me, like having to think about my death. So you just don't seem scared at all, right? Especially given the information that you receive. So yeah, I'm very inspired by that to say the least. And you mentioned your book and I want to ask you about that, right? So again, for the listeners, Gretchen's book is called Healing Whispers from Spirit Guides, Bridging the Gap Between Life and the Afterlife with a Debt Doula's Wisdom. Why was it important for you to write this book? Why did you need to get it out at this time?
Okay, that's a really good question because at the time, I was told by a team to write it. I didn't feel like a qualified person to write a book. I didn't even know what I would write about. I woke up one June morning and I heard a voice telling me you're going to write a book. And I remember thinking, write a book? What would I even write about? And they just said, write what you know. Um, I have never wanted to write a book. That seems really time consuming. And it was, by the way. And it was really hard. And, it didn't like flow from me like I would expect. You guys are telling me to write this book. It better just flow and just get it all out there. Well, it didn't. I had to really think about it. So I ended up referring to the journals that I have all these journals of my patients. And I thought, the most transformative experiences I'm having are at the bedside of my patients. And so, and also the teachings from A Team. So when I wrote this book, I wrote about one chapter would be about what I've learned, like a small lesson that I've learned through this process, and then a supporting story of one of my patients, and then another lesson and a supporting story. And I end each chapter with a quote from A Team because they have such beautiful things that they share on universal love and on all sorts of things, actually. But so I wrote that book because I was told to, and now I know the importance behind it. So for the last 20 years, A Team has been pushing compassion, 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 just like drilling it in. And now they're shifting it to connection. You're already on the connection path. You're a podcaster. So you're sitting here with people and you're connecting people and you're telling people stories and you're helping people to tell their stories and you're sharing your own stories. So you've already been on the connection path. So I've been on the compassion path, and they're starting now with the book being finished to move me to the connection path. So that's what I'm starting to explore. And so I see the reasoning behind it now, but I didn't at the time.
Connection. I think I love that you said that, right? And you captured exactly what I'm trying to do with this podcast. Part of one of the sub themes for this podcast as well is also compassion, especially as it pertains to people's belief systems and things that they're experiencing, because I'm a big believer in not putting things in a box. And I
Mm-hmm.
think what people used to consider more sci-fi and, things that they would consider to be conspiracy theories, having these conversations, connecting with people, give people the space to listen in on certain experiences and feel, oh, I'm not crazy, this is normal, I can connect with spirit, or I can connect with the higher power, God, the creator, whatever you want to call it, in a way that I can be at peace with, rather than judging myself for it. Or when I hear someone else's story about their journey and certain things they've overcome, then I myself can kind of have some sort of compassion or empathy
Yeah.
towards that person. So I love that you said that. And I feel like at this time, because so many people are waking up, I believe that your book is going to aid in waking people up and getting more comfortable with um the afterlife and death. And part of the
Mhm.
reason why I like talking about death is because the more you talk about death, the more you live an intentional life. That's my personal belief, right?
Yes.
If you know that at some point, by God's grace, the goal is that we live to a ripe age, right? Um, but if you know that life is fleeting and life is fast, right? Maybe you're going to have an appreciation for your friends and family a little bit more, even when they piss you off, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that has, again, I don't want to project, but that's one of the reasons why I love talking. I don't, let me not say love talking about death, but I think it's important to talk about it, because I think it is a grounding force, right? And we take away the fear of it so that we can all not necessarily be thinking in the back of our head, look, I'm going to die tomorrow, but like you could be more intentional and you can be more fearless. So you talked about having transformational experiences at the bedside of your patients. And I'm sure we've kind of like touched on some of these throughout our conversation, but is there one particular transformation that really changed you in a way that you would like to share with the audience? And some of these transformational experiences I'm thinking about is, I know that, for example, there are certain things I've struggled to forgive because I just don't understand. But then I might hear someone's story, or I might connect with someone that all of a sudden I have a paradigm shift and I'm able to release and forgive people in my life. And that just changes my energy and the flow of my life force. So, again, that's just my personal example. But are there any profound transformational experiences that you've had that have really impacted your life in a positive way?
So yes, I would say, and I mentioned this also in the book. I talk about shared death experiences and having the opportunity to experience those. That's whenever an observer, a witness who is not dying, actually goes partway into the spirit world with the person who is transitioning. And these experiences have completely changed me profoundly. It's validated um, my experience is that there is an afterlife. But what I have found even more transformative is I've had patients as they transition and they're standing outside their bodies take the time to teach me something. They're aware of my presence. And I loved when you were talking about the fingers and the different cups and our souls. I have one patient, Mrs. Wilma, I will call her. Mrs. Wilma was a part of a program called NODA, which stands for No One Dies Alone. And she was dying alone. She was a Black woman in her late 80s, and she she was dying because she was dying alone because her family could not afford to travel in to be with her. It wasn't that she didn't have any family, but so as I'm sitting with her and I'm holding her hand and I start the process of, going inward and connecting to her. It could be what you could call a prayer or an intention. And I'm sitting there with her, and all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, a little girl walks in the room, and she's in black and white. So when I see spirit in black and white, it's usually puts them in a time frame of 1920s to 1970s, respectively. And so I knew it was young Mrs. Wilma of age 10 or 12 years old. Her hair was twisted in little pigtails. She had on black shoes with like little white socks and a white dress. It was like her Sunday best, and she's like 10 or 12. And I had this overwhelming sense of segregation. And this was important because Mrs. Wilma was dying alone, and she had this overarching theme her entire life of being separated through segregation as a child, and then separated from her family and dying alone now in the final stages. So she actually walked over and took my other hand. So I am aware that I'm holding Mrs. Wilma's hand with my left hand, and she took my right hand. And when that happened, the hospital room that I was in transformed into a forest. And the story that she didn't use her mouth to talk, but it was like it was telepathic information. And it turned into this giant forest. And she told me we were going to scale this giant tree that we were standing now in front of. And we did. And when I got to the top, I could see full 360, even though I was only facing one direction. And she was telling me, I'm going to sum it up, but in the story, it's much more detailed. But basically, here's this one tree, this one life. It appears separate from that tree and that tree and that tree because we're in a forest. But this one tree has all these branches, and all these branches appear separate from the tree. And every one of these branches have all these little tinier branches that appear separate from that branch. And all those tiny branches have leaves. And each one of those leaves leads separate little individual lives. So this whole tree is leaves on top of bigger branches attached to one tree. But this one tree is not standing alone. It's part of a larger forest. And she was really pushing the importance that we are all connected. We are all one, even though we all individually appear to be leading separate lives, that we are never alone, that we are always connected. And this was such an important teaching to her because it contradicted the physical life that she had led. So I would say some of the most transformative experiences that I am having that have shifted my perspective on life and continue to every time I have them are shared death experiences where the patient is actually teaching me something before they actually move all the way over.
What a beautiful story with such beautiful imagery. I felt like I was lost in that story for a second, just like picturing the forest and how amazing and what a gift, honestly, for you to be able to share in that experience, right? Even like you called it a shared death experience, and this is my first time hearing it, but to be able to have that vision, right? And obviously that was a knowing for her, but you're also able to share in that experience and keep that for yourself in your own waking world and as you move through life. And again, it kind of touches very nicely on the theme that you talked about connection and spirit kind of
Hmm.
pushing you more and more into that. And I don't believe in coincidences. So I believe, someone could say you having that experience kind of like again it's part of the synchronicity towards connection and understanding what connection is and how it really works and being able to communicate that to the rest of us listening to you and the rest of us who are going to read your book. So thank you for sharing such a beautiful story. Um
Would you
Uh,
mind if I added one more thing?
yes, please.
Okay, real quick. I just, for anyone who's listening to what it would feel like to have a shared death experience, it would be as if I asked you right now, wherever you're sitting, to close your eyes and imagine the beach, and you could hear the waves rushing on the shore. You could feel the sand beneath your toes, and you could hear the cry of the seagull and feel the wind on your skin. And it feels like a memory. It feels like a thought, just like right there, like right on the tip of your tongue. It's right there. So it isn't like this big boom. All of a sudden, you're standing in a forest. You're still very much aware that you're sitting in a hospital room, but it's also happening overlaid like a memory, like imagining a beach. So if you're sitting here right now looking at me, but also imagining a beach, it's like that, but a little bit more intense. So it is something that someone who maybe didn't believe in this could easily dismiss it. And I just want people to not be dismissive, to be open to those beautiful experiences because they grow and get more intense as you allow yourself to open to them.
Thank you for sharing that. I've had a couple of different conversations with people recently that have talked about mystical experiences, but they're very similar to near death experiences, right? Because like you're calling this a shared death experience. People have near death experiences. Some people have mystical experiences, and when you look at the experiences and what they're describing, they all kind of sound similar. Like you're all able to tap into this dimension that is not necessarily of this world, right? And through different sort of imagery and feelings and sensations. So I appreciate you for kind of going the extra mile to describe what that could look like so that people are not dismissive to it. Though I believe that the audience is very open to the things that we're sharing. But I think it's always important to kind of make it more explain it in a more bare bones kind of fashion. But like all of these things are very similar to one another, right? And they're triggered by different things. Some people it's during meditation, some people have a traumatic experience. And right now, like that was triggered for you in your work as a death doula with your patient. Do your I don't know if patient is the right word for your clients. I don't know if they're interchangeable, but let me know because I've been saying going back between clients and patients, and you're not necessarily a nurse, but I just want to make sure that I'm not using the wrong wording, or maybe it doesn't matter. But do you ever get visits from clients who've passed on, like, and they come visit you after a year or two just to like pop in and say hi because you were such an important part of their journey, especially towards the end of their life, really, the end of their story?
I've had Mr. A come back, and I had a reading done by a medium who brought in Mr. A for me, which I wasn't expecting, but I loved it. And one of the reasons that I knew, for example, that Mrs. Julie had passed was because she appeared in my car and sat next to me when I was running errands. And I was like, oh, okay. So then I called the nursing home, and they confirmed that she had just transitioned. So they do appear, like Miss Julie did, for example, right beside me with this. She gave me this feeling of just gratitude, this overwhelming sense of gratitude. And her story is also beautiful. It was she was lovely. Um, but they have, as far as like, do they pop in a year later? Only Mr. A. But the other
Yeah.
ones usually happen right after.
Okay. And when you say they appeared next to you, right? Can you
Mhm.
see them physically? I mean, I know you can't touch them because they're spirit, right? But do you see them physically or do you sense their essence? Like what does that look like for you? Like is it actually an image or more of like a feeling and a vision in your mind?
Yes. So objective would be if I were seeing it with my own physical rods and cones in my physical eyes in my physical focus. But I saw her subjectively, which would be in my mind's eye. But I just happened to turn my head and I took a double take because in my head it was like a projection of there she was sitting on my seat. And I was like, I was going to go see her later on this afternoon. I don't guess I'm going. It's like she's already here. And then the feeling comes along with it. This love, but this for her it was so much gratitude. This just like she thought of me as a dear friend, which was just so moving. And so, yeah, so it was subjective. I didn't see her as if she were a part of my car. I saw her as if I were remembering the beach. And there it was on my seat.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I have to ask, right? Because we've talked so much about the afterlife and with the work that you do, why have you come to a conclusion or a knowing of why we're here, right? And I know the standard answer is like we're here to learn and all that stuff and go on a journey, but if that's where you are, that's fine and you can expand on it. But ha- have you given much thought to why we're here, or has spirit kind of given you insight as to what the purpose of this reality is?
So I think that we are multi-purpose. I don't think it's a singular concept that we're all here to do at all. I think that as souls who have had many experiences in many bodies, probably on many different planets, on many different dimensions and planes, that we come with different smaller reasons for why we are here. But on a grander scale, I think I guess let's just talk about the human collective scale. Let's just talk about planet Earth. We'll narrow it down there. I think a lot of us are here to help the human collective. Because remember, while we are utilizing human collective and earthly bodies, we're actually so much more than that. But we are here to help the human collective evolve into knowing more of itself. So, recognizing the truth of who we are, that we are multidimensional, that this is one fragment of who we are. And we do that by coming here and just being present in the now and experiencing the good and the bad, even though I don't like the word good and bad either, because really it's all good. But, things that are joyous, the anger, the pain, the hurt, all those great things that maybe we don't get to experience in other places, all of it all combined into one big soup. We get to do this. That's what A Team tells me all the time. Wow, you get to do this, which I don't like to hear when I'm specifically angry. But they're like, wow, take it in. You get to be angry. So I think that's part of it. I think we're here just to be and experience in all of its just joyous wonderment and with smaller little missions for ourselves that we want to learn, but to help evolve the human collective as a whole into a little bit more self-realization.
So there's something you mentioned in the book. It's called the Science Club, right? Which is which deals with the exploration of spirituality and the afterlife. What is the Science Club? Because I'm like, is this something that schools should create and
Oh
and
my
like
gosh.
study, or this is just kind of like this is something else. Like, could you expand on what that is?
Sure. Okay, so I was going into the closet, which in my house was the quietest room at the time, to go sit and do a meditation. I was attempting to connect to A Team because I wanted to ask them some questions about better understanding time and linear time and all the dimensions of time. Like just that little old question, no big deal. But I went in there to ask that with the intention of asking A Team that question. And then a man appeared in my closet. Now, he appeared to me as if the same way Miss Julie appeared in my car, the same way the hospital room transformed into the forest. It was in my mind, but very detailed. So, and it like overlays over my closet, my clothes. So the gentleman was British because we're having a conversation, and I saw what he looked like: the little mustache, the dark hair, his legs were crossed. Like we had, I journaled all of this stuff, and afterwards, I couldn't hear his name, and then afterwards, I went and I looked him up, and I found his picture. Okay, so keep in mind that I am an art history and theology major. I never took any physics classes. I maybe took a physics class in high school because I remember the poster saying physics is fun, you know, like, but I'm not a physicist and I have no interest. But his name was Paul Dirac. I didn't know who he was even after I looked him up, but it turns out he was kind of a big deal, like buddies with Einstein and like contributed to physics in a way that he earned a Nobel Prize with Schrodinger, the guy who's like Schrodinger's cat. See, I can't even tell you what it's about. Okay, so like, so there he was, Paul Dirac, and so he came with a group of other physicists who were deceased, and one guy who wasn't a physicist, he's a biologist whose name is Kurt Hofer, and he just died in the last few years. didn't even know him, but he was some biologist in Florida. So again, don't know any of these people. Um, and I started writing down what they were telling me, and they were giving me homework assignments. And so I just kind of grouped them all in because there was always new members being introduced, and I just call them Science Club. And so what they're doing is they're giving me information that I don't believe is new to the physics community, but it's new to me so that I can go look it up and validate it. So it gives me more trust in my own spirit team that I'm working with. And in addition to that, they're helping me to link. Oh, I mean, it's so hard. It goes over my head. Let me tell you, I can read it 10 times on the internet and it's still, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. But they're trying to help how it relates to spirituality. So they're trying to combine physics and spirituality to help me understand, maybe so I can reach people on a more logical way. I'm sure it's for a greater purpose. It's not just for my own, try to teach me physics. No, I'm beyond that. I don't want to know physics like that. So, um, but they come in, they give me a few lessons. I have journaled all of that and I have it included in the book under Science Club. I almost didn't include it. My husband, who's not spiritual but very logical, it's his favorite part. He wanted me to include that. And I can read it like 10 times and I'm like, I don't even know what I wrote. Like it's out there. There are a few things I could not validate, but I left him in because maybe one day they'll be validated. One of them is platonic waves. Because I think platonic solids exist and platonic waves don't. So I left him in there as part of what they were talking about platonic waves, um, just so I can keep it all. But, yeah, that's Science Club.
I just don't think that you can put mathematics and science in one bucket and put spirituality and some of these
Exactly.
supernatural phenomenon in a different bucket because we're spiritual beings having a human experience and everything is interconnected. And that's why, like, quantum computing, AI, quantum physics, these are like hot button topics that people are like racing to figure out, racing to understand. So I think the spiritual community and the science community might start to collaborate more in the future. And it's fascinating, right? Because we already have people who study near death experiences, right? And like look at it from a spiritual perspective, but also look at it from like a science perspective, right? Because you have doctors
Yeah.
and researchers and academics who are heavily studying that subject. So very, very, very fascinating. Thank you so much, Gretchen, for stopping by Shifting Dimensions. I have to ask you, I ask all my guests, have you shifted in perspective on anything recently? And it could be lighthearted. Maybe you discovered a new food or started, doing something that you never thought you'd be interested in doing, or it could be as deep as you want it to be.
I am shifting in perspective. Yes. Maybe a week or two ago. So very recently, I suppose. My team in Spirit A team is it's helping me to consider doing verbal channeling. So before I would write it down, I would basically like be an assistant. I would just they dictate to me and I'd write it all down. So now I am attempting, and I have a nice group of ladies who are so patient with me while I sit and try to practice verbal channeling. I was so terrified to do it because I don't want to have like a weird voice. Hello, like sometimes you hear people with weird voices when they channel. So I didn't want to do that. Luckily, everything came out on the conscious channel. So it came out in my own voice, which was what I was happy with. But so my perspective shift is that I am going to trust spirit and allow the verbal channel to come through.
Yeah, it's so funny. I was on mute and cracking up, guys. So you probably didn't hear me laughing so much in the background. But yeah, that's so funny. And I have to ask, because obviously this work that you're doing, I think is going to be super helpful to a lot of people, but also it comes with a lot of like judgment. Do you ever get worried about what people think about you channeling or talking about these things?
Yes. Yes, I do. And I
Yeah.
didn't do it. I have a son who's 19, and so he's in college, and I didn't do it for most of his life. My daughter's 13, and now I'm just like, well, I hope she's okay with it because I have it on Facebook. If any mom looks me up, I worry about them saying, their kid can't play with my kid, that kind of thing. But really, it's only that. But I have found since putting out this book, since telling people I was writing the book, which is being held accountable, is that stepping into who I am and owning who I am is, I'm finding more and more people that I never would have thought were spiritual in any way or are spiritually in the closet will privately confide in me. Even my husband's friends will come up and say, I've had an outer body experience, and so I'm just like, wow, okay, I am supposed to be putting it out there and sharing and normalizing spirituality and normalizing talking about death and just helping people to connect. That's where A Team's sending me next. So I think the more we can be vulnerable and trust that we're right where we're supposed to be and set aside those judgments, because I've had those fears for a long time. I'm doing it. I'm setting it aside and I'm finding it's actually more good than bad coming from it. Definitely.
Yes. And to one of the themes that we talked about on the shows, we have to be as authentic as possible, and
Yes.
we don't want to look back and think, "Ugh, I wish I did that thing." So
That's
thank
right. I
you.
don't want to live like Mr. Robinson.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much again. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you and pick up your book?
The book is on Amazon. The audiobook, the Kindle, and the paperback copy. And my website is www.helengretchenjones.com.
Awesome. I'm going to leave those links in the show notes. Thank you, Gretchen, for stopping by Shifting Dimensions.
Thank you, Jimmy. Been nice being here.